Hello, everyone. So glad that you're all joining us today. My name is Hamida Bagarathi, pronouns she, her, hers, and I joyfully get the chance to lead out learning communities at NU. I join you today from Ypsilanti on the unceded ground of the Anishinaabeg, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi, who create the three council fires of Michigan, and the Sauk, and the Fox, and the Wyandotte. And I name that to think about the intergenerational healing that has happened, has to happen, is happening between our relationship to place and space. And we're also going to spend some more time talking about healing today. Um, so I hold the past, the folks of the past, and the folks of the present who are living and thriving right now as we enter this space. So you're at Centering Justice. Glad to have you. CJ, as we affectionately call it, is a place where we invite BIPOC visionaries, dreamers, storytellers, doers, creatives to really talk about the ways that they're interrupting the status quo, particularly dominant narratives that don't give space or create space or hold space for BIPOC folks and their flourishment. And we ask those folks to help inspire us, believe in different, move different, dream different, and give us ideas of how to be different, or in a lot of ways, keep on doing what we're doing too. And so I'm really, really excited to bring back Julie Quiroz, who has been at CJ. We are, some of us may be experiencing returns. I feel like in some ways, Centering Justice is experiencing a return. In September, we talked about who we heal with, and we had a returning Centering Justice speaker, collaborator. And this year, this month, we're talking about how we heal. And this year, Julie, again, has returned with us to help us think about how we heal, and particularly in a value-centered way. So I gotta give some real shout out to Julie because she, who goes by she, her, hers as pronouns, nurtures and leads in a culture to transform systems and structures for generations to come. She is the founder and leader strategist of New Moon Collaborations and has years of experience consulting. She served on the Movement Strategy Center leadership team and helped spark the creation of the Birth Equity Center. And co-founded Untold Stories of Liberation and Love in Ypsilanti and authored the story American Residents. Also, y'all, she just moved to Puerto Rico. She is in our current house, this is day 1.25.
I walked here last night for the first time.
So we're just so excited to have you join us and help us think about values in action towards our healing. So and do a little reminder for what sort of brought us together here today is that really our core values offer a foundation for healing. We draw upon them in the times when we might not be explicitly thinking, but they're implicitly driving us. When we use them to guide our decisions and behaviors, they help us lead our best lives. And when we slip out of alignment, though, we can harm ourselves and community, which could only push us further away from the future we want to realize. So how can we stay centered on our values? And how can those values help us heal? And I feel that Yodit has a story to share about Julie that talks about how to step into values, move into values towards healing. So Yodit, want to join the space?
Hey, Hamida. Hey, you all. I know I say this every episode, but that they're my favorite, but this one is my favorite. And I do lovingly want to correct something, Hamida, because Julie has not been a guest of CJ. She has been an audience member, and we invited Julie to participate in a session around healing. And one of the many reasons I love and adore her is that as we were moving through that process, she found for herself that there wasn't alignment with the topic and helped us think about and really align that session to better match the right guest. And I remember thinking how I had tension around it because I really wanted Julie to be on CJ, and that's why she's here today, because I don't give up. But I really admired, and I think you all will grow to appreciate more as we unlock this conversation. I admired Julie checking in on that alignment and then circling back to say, I don't think it's there. And she participated that day as a guest and has been a champion and a cheerleader. But for context, so I love this topic. I love Julie being with us, and I love this topic because values and core beliefs and guiding principles is something I think about a lot. It's really alive in my consulting practice right now as we're trying to shift our clients from kind of performative equity and justice work to really leaning into what do they believe and how does that work sit at the seat of everything that they do. And so really for the last maybe year and a half, almost all of my consulting work here at New has been about helping folks shift their cultures. And one of the questions that I ask is, what do your values look like in practice? What do they look like in practice? And so I really am so delighted that Julie's here. And I first heard about Julie when we were doing listening sessions throughout the community for before we launched our Leaders of Color program, which is now our Champions for Change program. And I can see myself sitting in the conference room at United Way, and we were asking, who else do we need to talk to? And somebody said, have you talked to Julie Quiroz? Like, she's phenomenal. And I was like, Julie, who? And they're like, Julie Quiroz. And I was like, and they went on with how awesome you were. And I was like, I don't know her. I don't know her. I don't love her. And they were like, she is doing some incredible work in this community. And so I like reached out, and eventually Julie came to one of those sessions. And then I said, Julie, would you be a part of our facilitation team for the very first cohort of Leaders of Color? And we were planning the facilitation retreat. And I sent Julie, as we do with our facilitators, I sent her the agenda. And I'm paraphrasing, but she was like, you got way too much shit on this agenda. Like, it's way too much. And she was like, and it needs to be a whole day. And I was like, a whole day? How are we going to possibly get people, to spend a whole day? And what she said was, well, you're going to make the day so joyous that they don't know how long it takes or, what the time is. And so what happened was she and Elizabeth Whitaker Walker, who's still involved with the program, Melvin, who was with us then, and Leslie from Birth Detroit and Birth Center Equity, Leslie Welch, and a couple other people came to my house, and we literally ate and laughed and sang and danced and played our way into the launch of the very first Champions for Change program. And it really shifted. And I think, Julie, I can tell you honestly, and others could attest here, that how we meet, how we gather, what's happening in that space, what connections get made, the centering of joy is always on our minds. So your guidance that day literally transformed every meeting I've had since then. And it's more importantly shifted how I think about time, how I think about work and labor and practicing that and spaciousness. And I'm going to talk about untold stories of love and liberation with you later, but I will say that being in that space with you and being an advisor to you to New Moon is like being proximate to both power, resonance, and spirit simultaneously. Thank you, my friend, for being here. Thank you so much. And we want to, we read your receipts. We know you out here doing big things, but I want to invite you to bring yourself into space. And we always ask this question: tell us a bit about the communities and identities that you draw upon, and how are you bringing them into space today? Welcome, my love.
Thank you. And so great to see everyone. One of my core communities, geographic communities, is definitely Washtenaw. I was born there. I was back there for 7 years and just felt just such a deep sense of community. That in California is also those are my two homes, and just moved here to Puerto Rico and aspiring to be a good community member here in day, whatever this is, 10. She and her.
You moved, you literally packed up and shipped across a whole entire country.
Well, just so you all know, though, because, the practice of moving at the speed of trust and relationship and moving relationally. So Adela Martinez, who people might know from Detroit, who was part of the healing justice movement there, she's Puerto Rican. She moved back after Maria. Basically, my goal is to live on her block, and I moved back, and I live 3 houses down from Adela in Detroit. So that's why I'm here, is because we're collaborating, building stuff here. And my dream was to live on the same block, and I was like, and I am. So I'm 3 blocks down from Michigan community. So it all just flows in the way it flows. Core identities, mother, sister, friend, probably are my biggest. I always think of myself as an ancestor. I mean, a descendant of our ancestors and an ancestor to descendants to come. I often think of myself, as an assimilationist baby, which may resonate with some folks. If you grew up with parents, my father's from Ecuador, my mother's from sort of Dust Bowl, Kansas, both of them big cultural and economic dislocation in order to move up the ladder. So I think that process of letting go of community in order to be accepted into the racial and economic hierarchy in the US was formative for me and is part of both my strength and my healing process. I always say I'm a middle child in a dysfunctional family, which I think is actually, don't tell anyone else. In a complex family. There we go, in a complex family. I think those are the biggies. I would say community, in terms of community, poets and writers and connecting people through the spirit of words and how we share those with each other. And one I'll say, which has been a newer one to me, I'm Ecuadorian background, so my natural dance form is cumbia, but I started salsa dancing a few years ago, taking that practice on. And if there's any dancers out there, it takes some practice. But what I love is it really is a community. Wherever you go, there's many different forms of it, but you can always come in and interact with folks in that language. And so literally I was out last night, and it's just like, wherever you go, salsa and dance forms and cultural forms, hip hop is one of those, whatever practice that we have, cultural practice, I think is just a great way of forming community wherever we are.
Beautiful. Well, we typically kind of start with an opening prompt for our guest, Julie, and I'm going to drop that in the chat so that folks see it, that you see it, which is, in your life and work, what are you learning about how to center values, and how has that been important in your healing? And happy to hear from you on that, and also happy to take your guidance and flow in this conversation.
Okay, well, thank you. And as I was sharing with the team as we were getting on, so I've been have not had a permanent residence for about 3.5 months. I've been sort of couch surfing in different parts and then just moved into my home here. And so it was so wonderful to be asked that question. And I know we're just all in journey together, but it was such a gift to be able to think about this stuff because I've just been sort of moving and going and, so really, really appreciate that. I want to start, and this will be the teaser trailer for what I will say. I want to start by inviting people to do something physical, which is always is part of my practice. Teaser trailer, that's what comes next. So I want to invite you something, and then I'll tell you the story of it. But and if you could it seems to be like most people are sitting in a chair. And if you could just sit in your chair and ideally with your feet on the ground. If by some chance you're not sitting on a chair in this sort of way, you can also just mimic this with your hands and do it if you like. So it works any way you want to do it. So I would just invite you, first thing, just imagine you're sort of like waiting for a bus and kind of slouching, just kind of like go back, like the way you'd be if you were just like, I've been waiting for a bus for an hour. And just like physically do that in your chair. Okay, sit with that for 1 second. Okay. Now, imagine you're sort of like, you're straight up and down, like kind of, soldier at attention, straight up and down. Do that one, just straight up and down, and just like hold that for a little bit. And just feel that in your body. Okay. Now, I want you to just kind of imagine that there's almost like a little bit of a magnetic force or just a flow of energy forward. So you just the slightest bit forward, not like this, but just the slightest bit forward. And just let yourself be just the slightest bit forward. Okay. Good. Do it one more time and just pay attention to just like feel, not in your head, just like what you feel in your body. Okay, so do the straight up and down one. How's that feel? Okay, actually, let's do it right now. Well, no, I'll because we're not in a room together. I can't do it that way. Okay, straight up and down. Think of some words like, how does that feel? And then the back one, the waiting for the bus one. And then the sort of gentle, slightly forward one. So I'd love to ask, I guess we'll do it in chat. If you could write in chat, so just some words that you felt in the back one. What are some words that you felt in the back one? Just how did you feel? Passive, comfortable, exhale. Okay. Passive, warm, hold on, tight, blah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So comfortable, but kind of words about sort of low energy, right? A little bit vulnerable. Interesting. Right. Yeah. Like a cat, like this back like this. Interesting. Okay. Now tell me about the one where you were straight up. How did that feel? Like a beanbag. How did you feel straight up? Strong, stiff, rigid, focused, crackly, relaxing, interesting, tight but powerful, alert, powerful, interesting. Okay, correct. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, so much to unpack. I think we have to get tense, tall. Okay, interesting. Okay, so lots of things happen in our body, just the slightest little move. Okay, so tell me about this one where you were just slightly forward, a little bit of just sort of energy going forward. How do you feel in your body with that one? Open, ready, connected, anticipatory, curious, ready to talk, engaged, connecting, welcoming, listening, eager. Interesting, closer, interesting. Well, thank you all for doing that with me. And the question about like practicing values goes right back. This is a real thing. I felt kind of light pull from the center of my chest. Yeah. So what that, and you can do this with people in a room and do it every morning and everything. And it's that stance. Are any folks athletes out there? Does that stance remind you of anything? Have you ever seen that stance before where you're sort of like that? If you see a soccer player, if you see anyway, it's usually that's the stance, like or a boxer. It's just like ready, open, but all those words about readiness and open. So that stance is called forward stance, right? And it's just the simplest practice of opening ourselves to being closer, connected, welcoming, listening, eager, right? So my first experience with it, it's the way to help the horse move forward. There you go, because you're connected. Thank you, right? So I'll say this and then I'll tell the story. But if you can imagine, so if you are in a gathering with people and it's something that you care about, it's something that you're trying to do with other human beings because it matters in the world, which one of those energies do you think you would most want to bring into the space? Which one do you think brings you closer to like a collective purpose? Yeah.
I'm gonna riff here a little bit, Julie, and invite folks. You could come off mute if you could say it quickly.
Yeah.
People want to speak. You don't only have to use chat.
Great.
Yeah.
Does anyone have anything they want to share on that? Well, we can open it up again. But point being, and this is the answer to the question, is that I was somehow the universe granted me the space to be with folks who think about the very, very simple ways that our bodies create ways for us to live in our purpose together and ways for us to live in our values. And I feel like I'm always like the core, it's really simple. It's deceivingly simple. You know, it's like I feel like a lot of times we go into our heads where actually it's just like, wow, the way I hold myself in a meeting could create or not create possibility, create or not create my ability to live in my values. And I would say let me do the story. I'll do the story. So where did I learn that? Okay. So I've always been in nonprofit, like social justice work. And I was living in California in the Bay Area. And I was going to work for something called Movement Strategy Center. And the reason I wanted to work there is because it was like brilliant ecosystem strategy, alliance building, it was like just the smartest people, right? Doing like the biggest things. And I was just like, it's so innovative. So I went to work there. And then the first day, we weren't going to be in the office. We were going to be in a yoga studio. And I'm like, sure, okay, what are we going to do, right? So we go in, and there is this woman her name is Norma Wong, and she is a Zen priest and strategist from Hawaii, Native Hawaiian Chinese mix. And she was going to lead us for the day. And what we did was not talk. What we did was we did forward stance like for half the day, like all different forms of it, getting in your body, all this. And the reason, and I was like, my reaction is like, this is the weirdest meeting I've ever been to. I came here to work. When is this thing over? Literally, that was my response. So I was
no one else ever, Julie.
I thought it was kind of cool, but kind of like, just like,
Yeah.
why is my new organization wasting 8 hours of everybody's time doing this? So let's just say I did not, willingly come into this.
You weren't an early adopter.
Oh, no, yeah, I know. The universe found me. Always the universe finds me, right? So that's where I was introduced to forward stance and those sorts of, we did a lot of that. And as a group, like we did it individually, but as a group, you sort of observe like, oh, what happens to the group? Like, and so what I later learned was the reason that Movement Strategy Center did that is the Movement Strategy Center had been around for about 6 years at that time. And again, doing amazing, innovative work, but folks there were kind of like, we feel like we're just sort of tinkering with change. And they're like, what the world needs. So we're tinkering with change. What the world needs is like full cultural and systems transformation, but we're doing this. And what the world needs is that. So maybe it's time to just like get a little nutty and try something, see what works in other ways outside of the traditional nonprofit way of thinking about things, which is heavily Western white centric way of thinking about things still to this day as a general rule. So they were like, so they heard about Norma, who had begun to work with some different coalitions and coming in and doing breathing and forward stance and blah, 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 all this body-based work. And then having folks connect and converse on the basis of their somatic, their body insights rather than their head insights. And what they were seeing was that the ability to break through stalemates, the ability to build team, the ability to be creative and generative was exponential with Norma. So they're like, we don't know what this is. Let's bring Norma in. So I happened to be there at the moment that intersection happened. And so that's blessings to MSC for making that choice. And I'll tell you more about where that went. And again, I'm always like, I just get to hang out with the best people. I don't know how this happened. But like, as I said, I was a little resistant to it because I was like, here's work, here's things where I'm important and I matter and blah, 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 blah. And here's like, yoga, like, they're not the same thing, right? And, but where it really hit home for me, and I think this is some ways that practice relates back to healing, they all are intertwined, but I was at that time in a sort of domestic violence, not sort of, a domestic violence situation in my life. I was a solo mom, and I was in the process of leaving that, which, as folks know, is one of the most dangerous and most challenging times, and especially with a child and with economic issues and all the things. And as we all know, we're all on a spectrum of violence. We're all somewhere in that. And for folks who are engaging actively in domestic violence, they are, they can be lots of good ways and they can be lots of bad ways. They are rarely a monster. So it's complicated. But I was struggling to want to move him, my daughter, and me forward towards the future in a healthy way. I was, I didn't want to be, as like our thing, people said, passive and vulnerable. I didn't want to be like this. I was sort of like this because he's scary, right? So I was a little bit like this. So I was like, how do I be like this? How do I be in my power like this? How do I be open to the possibility that this family, not in this form that it is, that these folks could go on to be healthy, whole people, even him. Not my job, not on my dime, not in my house, but how could I do that? And so I began to bring the forward stance practice and some other stuff that we learned because we had more time together. I started to bring that into my engagements with him. And it was one of the most transformative experiences of my life. And I found that I could speak in a grounded and calm way. I could move towards vision in the face of threat, in the face of really unhealthy dynamics. And I could narrate that to my daughter in a way that moved us towards possibility. So that's when I was sold. I was like, this stuff works. I will pause there. Oh, so I'll just restate what I said before, is that for me, my view is that, well, and science actually is like a science thing, like the amount of time, the amount of power and insight we have in our brains is like 1% of what we've got. And we got a whole other 99% that's here, that's in our bodies in the present, that flows from the past, present, future, all that. So we have so much more strength, so much more power, so much more energy that for some reason we decide not to access when we're trying to. We just decide not to do that. So my practice is to always bring in embodied practice, as I did today. And then, as you can see, I feel like healing, when you're trying to, for me, healing is about moving the things out of the way that are blocking your ability to move in purpose with other folks. So I feel like it directs right there. Okay, stop.
No. So you mentioned Norma, to be in space with Norma is to be in almost an alternate universe. Has been my experience. I mean, her wisdoms and insights. And I found this short video of her talking about change and transformation, and I want to share it. It's like 3 minutes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Hang on a second. I want folks to get a taste of some of what you're sharing. Let me see.
This is good because she's a teacher. I'm a practitioner. I'm not a teacher. She's a teacher.
Yeah. Let me do this real quick. And the context is she did a workshop responding to people's questions about worldview. You see those at the bottom.
Thank you so much. What a question. Okay, so in order for something to truly transform, it cannot just be in the outer world or in the inner world. It must be in both. and not in a binary in terms of one after the other. It needs to occur almost simultaneously. And that's how you know that transformation is actually occurring rather than change. So it's that the energy and the beauty that you are beginning to see in yourself, that the way in which you are begins to transform the world that is around you in mutuality with others, not just in relationship to others. And the mutuality would be about almost the sharing of breath. There is this part where that is hard for us to feel right now because we actually literally cannot share breath as a matter of protection of each other. We are protecting that aspect. But let's look at that. If you look at it in the binary, then what we're doing is we are distancing ourselves. But really what we're doing is we're holding ourselves so closely that we know that at this moment, the sharing of breath will mean the demise of all of us. And therefore, we are practicing in a way, in such consciousness, that we hold ourselves in mutual bubbles, not in separating bubbles. And this would be a way in which we practice, even in this time of pandemic, the way in which the world that we imagine is the world that we create and make. A transformation is a leap. It is not one step after another. It occurs in a way in which requires total commitment, less hesitation. It means that even if there are setbacks, that those setbacks are leaps forward, and that the ways in which it is that we make that leap is we do not hold ourselves to small things. We do not settle for less.
The thing that really stood out to me there, Jay, was her talking about the difference between change and transformation. And when you opened up and talked about us tinkering, I've often said on this podcast that we're tinkering in broken systems. And so the leap that Norma talks about, this leap, not small steps for me, the leap that is transformational, I feel like you're offering today, even in talking about MSC's work, right? Like as a consultant, as a strategist, honey, I'm all in my head. I'm all in the frameworks. I'm all in the objectives and the tactics and the who's gonna do and what's the smarty goals. And and just to imagine an MSC shout out, like it's hugely inspirational. But I think what it came down to is a movement into our ancestral wisdoms and knowings. And it is from there that I believe we can cultivate not just beliefs, because beliefs without practice or faith without works are dead, right? But practice. Would love for you to oh God, I'd love for you to sing the dang on Yellow Pages, but say more if you would, or maybe.
One thing I want to add, and we all use words, right? One thing, and because Norma isn't here, I think it's really important, because one thing that happens, because Norma said we don't settle for small, and I just want to say, so small is actually where everything happens. I mean, small happens at the breath level, at the touch level, at the how you sit in your chair level. And Norma would agree with that. What she's saying is that we're going to do some linear to the thing that seems possible at the moment, rather than saying, what's our vision for my daughter's daughter? Mm-hmm. And what is the small thing I need to do today that is on that trajectory? Mm-hmm. And that small thing may be taking lunch to a friend. That may be the
Mm.
most important thing I do today,
Mm.
right? That just may be the most important thing to do today. So it's like, how do we, so, and we could drop in the chat, there's whole, well, let me talk about, okay, I'll bring it back to organizations. So small is important. And one of the things that happens is when we talk about systems and we talk about big things, and it's like, oh, it's so big, I can't do
Right.
it. I'll shrink back and do the little thing that I know. And so
Yeah.
back to practice again. Okay, I don't know which way to go on this story. I'm gonna do practice and I'm gonna go back to MSC. Boop, boop, boop,
Yeah.
and they're all related.
Yeah.
So I'll do MSC for a second. So Movement Strategy Center, what we went on to do was we did for 5 years, we did a series of gatherings of national leaders from around the country. We picked folks who were ready. We didn't pick folks by their titles. And we didn't go like, which sectors, who needs to be in the room, blah, blah, blah. We were like, seems like they're just ready to move in a different way. Literally, that was our criteria. Are you just like ready to move in a different way? So we brought together about 100 leaders from movements across the country. And we did this for 5 years. We had a series of gatherings. And in those gatherings, we would do forward stance, we'd breathe, we'd eat, and we would create spaciousness for people to be creative and to think in what we talked about as 100-year vision. And the guiding question, which lives to this day, someone just did a speech at U of M and used our guiding question 8 years later. And the guiding question was, where was it? I wrote it down. Oh, yes. How do we transform from a world of domination and extraction to a world of regeneration, resilience, and interdependence? Mind you, I know there's better words now, but this was not everybody was talking this way at the time. So we were saying that wherever you are, if you're in education, if you're in climate justice, like wherever you are, how are you embodying that shift? And what is that shift about? And for a lot of folks, this was an invitation that they had been waiting for and they were ready for and ready to move into. And folks will say like, oh, 100 years is so long. We're thinking 3-year increments. It's like, folks, our kids and their kids and their kids need us to think a little bit longer than that, right? So 7 generations, but again, 100 years is my daughter's daughter's daughter. It is not far away. So if I'm not thinking about that every single day, if I'm not thinking about the course of human history every single day and every breath, I'm letting my daughter down. So I invite everybody to actually think in 100 years, if not more. But there were some quotes from folks. I actually pulled it out before I came in the little book about that. So this transitions initiative, that was the question. And then we did physical practice and we talked about strategy, but we talked about strategy kind of the way we did this morning. Do something physical, reflect on it, then talk about strategy based on what you just did. Do something physical, reflect on it, talk about what you're going to do in relationship to what you just experienced. So that's what we did. And it changed a lot of people's lives. Folks may know Maria Ibarra, who was also, she's now in LA, but she was in Washington for a long time. She was at one of the gatherings. She's at We the People in Michigan still, but she lives in California. Maybe she's not supposed to say that, but she is. Anyways, so what her quote in there was the lab, we called them labs. The lab was the first time I felt permission to really listen to my body and not just my head. And so lots of comments from there about people, what they did. So, okay. So the thing about practice, if I'm meandering, just put in the chat, Julie, you're meandering, we're losing you. Anyway, so the thing I was going to say about practice, and I am a practitioner, not a teacher, and I just channel things that I've learned from being in space with Norma and other folks and facilitating stuff myself, but not as a teacher, as a facilitator, is that, and this goes to the thing that the stuff that we have to take on is so big. It's so big. It's terrifying, right? So
Julie, I'm so sorry. I'm going to pause. One of our folks asked, what's the difference between a teacher and a practitioner?
oh,
I think that might be helpful in understanding the story.
that's great. That's great. Well, a couple things. One is, so Norma is a Zen priest. And so there's a set of practice, like you have to be to do the kind of work, to lead the kind of like spiritually based work that she leads, you need to go through a process that is very deep and very intensive and is beyond anything I've ever done. So, and you are honored by your lineage. And this is something that, you know, white supremacist culture does not do. I mean, like, so white centric culture often forgets to do, because she is then empowered through her lineage to be able to teach that. So part of this is always just like knowing your roots and sticking with them and being, you know, and being humbled to the learning until the time has come when you are, when your lineage has bestowed on you the sort of responsibility to teach. So that's on one level. Then on the more like sort of mundane level, there are things that I can teach, but one of the habit, the bad default that we all do is you learn something on Monday and you're like, great, I'm going to go teach it to everybody because you're so excited about it. So that's why I'm saying it, I'm interrupting it. It's like, learn for a while, you know, learn, be in a practice for a long time before you try to teach others. So that's why I say that. So there are some things like I can lead a forward stance training and stuff like that. But I just think, again, when we're sort of decolonizing ourselves in traditional cultures, everything's relational, everything's about being together, past, present, and future in a way that's accountable to each other. So you don't just step out and say, hi, I'm the chi, you know, I'm the healer, you know, I'm the this. Like you do that in community, in an accountable way, with training, like with folks who, with, you know, when you're bringing in the wisdom and the anointment of that. So that's sort of what I mean. And I say it primarily because our culture has a habit, like I said, of reading a book on Monday and teaching it on Tuesday. And that's just like, no.
Oh, shots fired.
You know, I am in that picture at times and I don't like it, and that's okay. So Julie, you talk about habit, and you know, one thing that I've been thinking about is sort of like how intentional or unintentional habits are. And when you talk about like practicing values, sometimes I got to work real hard at it. Sometimes I have to remember, oh wow, hey, you value this, but you're doing this. What's up, my friend? And then trying to align the two when they fall out of like misalignment. And I think about oftentimes dominant structures and systems can facilitate it being, for some folks, many folks, relatively easy to fall into the habits that might realign and reaffirm the system, that are probably outside of their values, but it's just easy to do. So I'm just going to keep doing it because my brain is on autopilot and I didn't pay attention to how I made coffee, but I have a cup and there we go. Like, it makes me wonder, like, how do we sort of notice that they're habits that aren't really us or our values, and not only disrupt that, but even like start to figure out how to do the practice if you're like not even at the practice phase, like how to get there.
Can I add another layer to that? Because I got a private message that said trust of self is a critical part of engaging in transformation. And what are some things we might do to regain trust in ourselves? And I feel like that aligns really closely with the question you're asking. So Julie, if you feel comfortable, could you kind of speak with both of those? They seem so interconnected.
I'll try. We'll see how it goes. I'll try to lead. Yeah, definitely. So practice. So practice is something that you do consciously, intentionally, over and over and over again, hopefully every day for the rest of your life, or for 3,000 times until it's muscle memory. That's practice. And habit is unconscious, or largely unconscious things that we do just out of sort of reaction. So I often think of my life as like, what percentage of my life Like in a day, what percentage was unconscious reaction, habit, and what percentage was like conscious practice moving forward, right? So I know like I'll be like in the meeting and I'll be like, you know, I interrupt someone, or I do some bad habit. And it's just like, oh, then actually what I do is I like try to be like, okay, let me get into my forward stance. Let me remind my body what I want to do here. Am I, what am I valuing here? So that's the difference between that's a la my Norma teaching habit versus practice, which is slightly different ways than people necessarily talk about it. So the thing that I have come to respect and admire from Norma was that, okay, so she'll say, folks here have practice. Like if you are you're gonna play in a soccer game, what do you do to get ready for the soccer game? Say you wanna play a concert concerto on the piano. What do you do to get ready for that, right? The answer is you practice. And how often do you practice? Probably every day, right? You practice. And why do you practice? It's so that you have muscle memory of what you want to do at any given moment. So if a practice, and when you say you're not at the point of practice, and I'll just push back and say, everybody's at the point of practice. You can practice any day. You can practice right this minute. We just did it. So you could say, for the next 30 days, I'm going to wake up every morning and I'm just going to stand slightly forward for 2 minutes and remind myself what that feels like. Do that for 30 days. Watch what happens. And watch what happens is that when you go to the meeting, you will more quickly just naturally go into a forward stance, because it's just something that you do all the time. You don't have to think about it anymore. It has become muscle memory. And then that beautiful list of things will happen. You will be open, you will be listenful, you will be all those things just because you took 1 minute every morning to practice. So the thing about practice is that it's the easiest thing and we don't do it. And it doesn't have to be hard. You don't have to read a book. You don't have to get a gym membership. You don't have to do anything. You literally, it's about the intention of doing something simple. Can you share, what was the practice that you shared one day? You were talking about tea or something, Hamida? What do you do something with tea every day?
Okay, I have like 12 thoughts right now, Julie. So I'm gonna try to corral the cats
Over here
that are
just
all over
blowing
the
my
place, right? Like, to the person that asked the question, one thing I've been thinking about, and this is probably from September, is how seriously am I taking myself? And hearing and this was a question we also asked your audience, and hearing you talk about practice and the practice of practice is sort of like taking oneself seriously, right? Like making time, making space, and holding trust, or being able to trust oneself. So I think about what it means to build trust in one's word, right? And saying, I said I'm going to do this for 30 days and we're going to do it. We're not going to be apex stander forwarder every single day. It's not going to be beautiful, perfect, whatever, but it's that commitment to self, right? And showing up for oneself, right?
Yeah. And Norma's advice always when you're starting a practice is 15 minutes a day of something for 30 days. Don't try to get any more elaborate than that. And I really like your trust thing, because there is that thing where you're just like, oh, I trust myself that I'm going to do this. I trust myself. And the part I was going to say about trusting sort of just the arc of your own development. It's like wherever you are is wherever you're supposed to be, right? And so practice sort of, when you're like kind of doing it over a long period of time, you're not about like, oh, this day, like, as we know, like a trumpet player getting ready, right? Every day is not going to be great. Some days are going to be off and some days are going to be on and whatever. The point is that you're just doing it. That you're showing up for yourself. You're showing up for your body. You're showing up for your purpose every day. And then sort of that is going to go into the the performance, the game, the meeting, your children, whatever it is, it's going to spill over just because you've got that in your body now.
I love the self to systems piece, y'all, and the this invitation to trust as its own practice. So it's and what I was thinking about the person's question and about the lure of dominant systems of even our work in organizations to, one, folks are incentivized, here in Washtenaw County, Julie, you and I have talked about this before, it's a highly intellectual community. It's a very cognitive community, and you are rewarded and incentivized to be in your head and to be doing a lot of thinking. And I would say that's a microcosm of the culture that we live in that valorizes and values our intellectualism, it values individualism, and it pulls us from ourselves. I mean, part of what I really would love for you to talk about Untold. If you could tell a little story of that, because it's one of the more recent experiences for me of the revolutionary act of returning to self. Of returning to self in the context of practice. So how about if you talk about it a little bit, what it is, what Untold Stories is, and then I would love to kind of stay with this self to systems idea, because for me, at least in this moment, you took me a little far, a little fast with just practice every day. No. I mean, just being real, and this might not be true for others, but there's something to say about habits that maladaptive habits in particular, that can be a response to trauma, can be a response to detachment, can be a response that I just need to spend a little more time there with you, but I think Untold would get us there.
Okay.
If you in mind.
And I'll just put a pin in. Isn't it interesting that 15 minutes a day sounds hard? Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Why is that hard?
Yeah.
Why is that hard?
Yeah, why? Right. Yeah.
Well,
Right?
and what are other ways we spend 15 minutes, like just pouring time away? But
Or
anyway.
even when you were talking about vision, like, people, I get pushback from clients all the time when we start that process, like, well, we don't know what's going to happen 5 or 10 or 100 years from now, or with values, like, well, whatever, right? Like, what do they look like in practice? We can't get everybody to do that, or when we talk about culture as like water and fluid, and it's not something that, you're going to necessarily, like, you're not going to like put a plan around it, you're going to have to practice into it, and it's going to be hard. I think similarly, the instinct to say, to spend 15 more minutes. And I'll be honest, a lot of the pushback that I get about transformation, culture change, et cetera, a lot of the resistance, even envisioning, is from folks who are experiencing the acute impacts of marginalization, right? The acute impacts of domination, extraction, that, there's a protection there. So I want to just soften habit a little bit to them also being protective, ways in which we're protecting ourselves. And so I think where you're going to take us, that you've opened for me, is how new practices, new ways of using our time can be healing and restorative along that journey too, right? It doesn't have
and
to
I want to
hurt
say,
like a
like
diet
the 15-minute thing is a little bit, again, it's like I just also want to say that the I want to talk about Untold. I also want to talk about personality at some point, but I also want to
go wherever you want.
I think Untold is good because it's Washtenaw, but so is personality. That I feel like there's a way that what we're not talking about is something new. And so I think something does happen when you bring community into a meeting and like, oh, we're going to do this thing with butcher paper and stuff like that. And I think if there's a way we can come into space and remind people that they are practicing already.
Yes.
I think the pushback isn't around practice. It's like no one calls it practice. The fact that you take care of the kids on on the street. The other people's kids, whatever, all those practices. So I would say, like, as a facilitator, one way to start is to be like, tell me what you do in your community on a daily basis that you think about, that's part of your values, and build from there rather than saying don't have a practice. So I feel like that is a little bit has to do with facilitation and the wording. And again, it's like
Mhm.
in with butcher paper and people are like,
Noted. Yeah. Yeah.
so
That's
cook
real.
something together instead, and then ask people how they learned how to cook. You know,
So
from a
are
grandma.
you like stop present facilitators, orgs, stop presenting this as some blank canvas that we have to build on and or like that we have to create, but let's actually invite
Totally.
what's already
Not only
happening.
blank
Yeah.
canvas, but
Yeah.
judgment of community that we somehow know something that they don't.
Yeah. Come on
Which
now.
we
Come on.
do not.
Come on. Come on.
We
Okay.
do not. If you look at this, what is going on in the world right now, we are clearly not doing the right things. So anybody who tells you to do it the way it's been done before is not fulfilling their responsibility to my daughter's daughter's daughter,
Come on now. Say
period.
it. Say it.
So anywho. Okay. Sorry, it's just, I feel really frustrated sometimes with the self-imposed limitations of what's doing and the lack of responsibility. I mean, raise your hand if you think that humankind is in a good situation right now. Raise your hand if you want to try something else. Raise your hand if you know that there's things that have been practiced for thousands of years that kept folks alive and are keeping people alive and keeping people nourished and keeping people happy that we can turn to.
Come on, that we can return to.
That we can
Okay.
return to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So
it's hard when you're like nonprofit context, but let's obliterate those.
That's right.
Oh, okay, so this will be a good blurring. This will be a good untold stories will be. So I came back to Washtenaw County in 1990 something, excuse me, 2000s and whatever.
Yeah.
But I had been away for most of my adult life. And then I came back to Washtenaw County and started to kind of get involved in community things. And it was, I felt uncomfortable that I felt often the spaces were both white dominated in terms of who was speaking and taking up space, but also just the worldview. And the worldview was exactly that, was just sort of like, here's the good things that work that white people do, and here's the problems that are happening in people of color communities. And I'm like, that is just not true. It's just not like true. And so like, there's no way we're going to get to any kind of systems change if that worldview and cultural stance is the opening. So I was kind of like, how can we do something else? And the other thing that was really true is that I felt lonely because I was like, I don't really know a lot of women of color and I don't know where sort of the hubs are, and I'm new here. So I'm like, so really the honest truth is that I wanted to make friends. So that's the truth. So I was like, so I noticed that some of the women, like Maria, for example, who I was seeing, they just felt like their energy, I really liked their energy, and they were like moving important things in the community. And I noticed that they were all secret poets. Like Maria's a poet, I'm a poet, Kat's a poet, Tanya's a poet. So I was like, wow, what if we, instead of getting together for the, whatever caucus thing, whatever it is, or in reaction to something city council did, what if we got together around poetry, because it's like giving us energy and community. What if we got together on that? So we started this thing. We started this thing on Facebook. We had to put a poem. We had to tag each other and write a new poem, and it was like just bringing people in. And Maria had come to one of the labs, and we're like, what if we did something like that with women of color here? And then someone told me, and this was amazing, and this is where like one person can make a difference. They were like, oh, San Francisco Foundation is doing these grants for culture or something, and you didn't have to have a 501c3. I was like, wait, you're like 5 of us? Let's go. And they were like, yeah, 5 women of color, go. So we actually got money. And so our approach was, well, one was we were just going to have fun, the 5 of us. And so this was Desiree Simmons, Maria Ibarra, Tanya, Raya, and Catalina Rios, and me. And so we were like, let's just create these spaces. And we were like, the spaces would be like ostensibly poetry. People were invited to poetry, but really it was about just like loving on everybody. So it'd be like, so we had money. So we had food, we had amazing childcare. We made the space beautiful. So like people walked in, they were like, oh, I'm coming into like, oh, and we gave stipends for their time. Cause like, who can take a Saturday to write poetry? But we're like,
cashola at that. You
Cashola,
walk in the door
hold on,
and get a
cashola.
Benjamin.
so we were just like, everything was volunteer, but we were just like, all the money is going to go in the community. And the point was to be like, we wanted to create just like a different center where these women would come in and just feel valued and loved and trusted with whatever they did with that time. And honestly, gosh, that was like the main thing, in addition to me wanting to make new friends. That was it. And then also we wrote poetry, but we wrote poetry in the same way that we just did in the beginning. Is we did something, we reflected on it, people wrote poems. We put out an anthology. We have a great Kirkus review of books. You can get it. We sold it. Oh, here again, practice. We sold it, the hard copies of the anthology. We only sold at Blackstone Books to intentionally disrupt a centering of other bookstores. Let me just say it that way, and make everybody go to Ypsilanti to buy it. And so it's sold out over and over again. There's no hard copies anymore, and you can buy it on Amazon. And I hate to say that, but it was the only way for it to be continuously out there. So that was something that was, oh, cool, yay, yes. And we had a book party there with dancing at Blackstone. But so what that did was, like I said, created something that we collaborated on together. We did it from a place of love and safety and liberation. We did it outside of the bounds of sort of policy and stuff like that. It was just like, let's just like build something that has energy and love that will just go in lots of ways. And we did that for like 2 years. We did lots of things. You can find it online. If someone wants to drop in the chat, it's liberationstories.com. You can see all the poems and all the things, podcasts, things we did. But so I made friends and new collaborations sprung up. And I hope that people felt trusted about their instincts, about wanting to move in different ways in Washtenaw, and felt powerful sisterhood to do that. I know sometimes folks will ask, well, what's happening with it now? Is it still going on? And I would also toss out the nonprofit measure of things lasting as structures. I'm like, if the measure of this is the energy and the relationships and the transformed lives that it produced, that's the only measure that I care about. Is it like functioning? Is it, filling out forms? No, that's not the measure. But so that's what Untold Stories is, and you guys could look at it. But that's an example of, like, people call that a cultural strategy, where again, if you were going to play it, I would say, like, if it's like, wow, do we want to tinker with a policy agenda? I'm not saying, and let me just say, I'm not, okay. The policy work is so hard and so important, and things that are happening in Washington are so important. But in addition to that, if we want to actually change how people even think about policy, if we want to change what policies are even being crafted and who they're being crafted by, then let's do some other things as well.
Speaking of other things, Hamida, did you have I want to ask about birth center equity. Leslie Welch, one of the co-founders, has been a guest here on Centering Justice. She's a friend of New, a personal friend of mine, a part of our crew, an old Untold writer. But can you talk, I think that work, the connection between the Birth Detroit organization and birth center equity and what's happening there is so important. And I would love for people to know about it and to be able to support the vision and the learnings from that.
Yeah,
about it.
It relates directly to practice and values too. And this is a rock that Leslie gave me that says liberation on it, so that I can remember that value and hold it in my hand. And interesting, the story that you started with, where you said, like, I was like, let's have a really fun first retreat of Champions for Change.
Yeah.
And we were going around, and I think I said something like, I said, can we talk about what practices people have? It was kind of was considered a weird connection. And we went around and Leslie was like, prayer.
Yep.
And I looked over and I was like, who are you? I didn't know her anything. We
Yep.
connected and she's like, can I come to Untold Stories? And we did. So when I talk about the power of the connections and the power of interrupting how we do things, Les and I know each other because I said, let's talk about practice. She said prayer. She came to Untold Stories. And now we're running a national organization and she's in Forbes magazine today. So, but I'm like, it works. It really works. So anyways, that's how I got to know Leslie. So Leslie was the head of, she was the deputy director of public health for the city of Detroit. Part of her work there was around the ways that we do not serve Black mothers equitably or safely in maternity and in birthing. And she and other folks pulled together to join, to create something that at the time was just an idea, which was Birth Detroit. And Birth Detroit is the first Black-led birth center in Detroit. And it is currently the only birth center in Detroit, I believe. And it's
Sidebar, Julie, I don't know if you know this, but I was with Nicole White when that idea was scratched out on the back of an envelope into like 28.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful to see where it's come.
Right. Yeah. And so I was in community with Les. Again, it wasn't a working thing. It was just like, how do we build community with women? And then, so I was kind of a spark. Well, anyway, so Birth Detroit. So remembering COVID, when the interest rates went to zero, does everybody remember that? The interest rates went to zero. And it was like, because the thing in COVID, a practice was like, how do I not get just depressed and just overwhelmed by this? How do I hold on to vision? How do I hold on to vision? How do I build? How do I build? How do I build? How do I create and collaborate with friends? So I was like, oh, okay. Mortgage rates just went to zero. I know Birth Detroit wants to buy a building. So I texted Les and I said, hey, Les, you want to buy a building? Birth Detroit. She texted me back. She's like, I'd love to buy a building. I don't have any capital. And I was like, what if we just imagined that it was possible? Like, what if we just went nuts? And so then I connected her with folks with I know, who blah, 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 blah. It grew into, this is a very long story. It grew into how does not just Birth Detroit do this, but how do all Black-led, Black and Indigenous and people of color-led birth centers, of which at the time we only knew of 14. We are now a network of 30. It grew to be a network. And what is the strategy and aggregate power building strategy of BIPOC-led birth centers to actually transform the entire maternal health system and the way we think about maternal care? So that became Birth Center Equity. It's birthcenterequity.org. So we're now a national network. We invest in organization in birth centers across the country. And Leslie was in Forbes magazine today if you want to read about our strategy. But I just came from a retreat. I was there last week in Atlanta. And so the core values that are articulated that have been from the start with Birth Center Equity are safety, abundance, and liberation. We're also now weaving in accountability. And those come, this is super important. It is a network that is grounded in the practices and values of birthing and of liberatory birthing, not birthing that has now been medicalized, but birthing as our foremothers did. And so safety, abundance, and liberation come directly from the core mission and practice of the organization. So I love that. And we always try to touch back to that. And it would be great. Like Neem could also talk about how you do that, but we touch back to it. But there was such a deepening to me. So we talk about the centering of BIPOC midwives a lot. And that everything in how we approach the work, resource the work, and innovate in the work needs to be led, centering BIPOC midwives. I'm not a midwife. I'm a mom, but I'm not a midwife. And
I'm a doula.
So we were all in Atlanta together last week for a team retreat for Birth Center Equity. And 2 of our new team members are midwives.
Mhm.
And it was so interesting being being in my practice of listening, hearing the way that they talked about the work and approached the work from a midwife lens and practice. And I realized that I had a lot to learn about what that meant. So I had been saying, but I had a lot to learn about what that meant. And so just again, like we started with a set of values and then deepening, and then it's always like, who needs to be at the center? And the center of Birth Center Equity is not me. I am not a Black midwife. That's who we need to center, and how does that shift how we talk about things?
Can I say something about that? Because so one of the things that the person I practice yoga with, she will encourage me to send my breath where there is tightness, right? Where it hurts, where does it hurt, baby? And then in practice, through stretching, she'll say, I want you to focus on sending your breath. During COVID, I became a doula, inspired, of course, by Leslie and others. But one of the parallels that I see at the systems level, I feel like many of us are either death doulas or birth doulas. We are simultaneously hospicing these worldviews and ways of being that no longer serve us while birthing what we need. And what I feel in my body is the equivalent to what I felt when I was laboring for my son. Deep in my hips, right? I've experienced an exacerbation in pain in my low back and in my hips. And lots of people are saying, oh, that's because we've been sitting for 3 years, but I'm experiencing it in a different way as birthing pain. And also learning to use breath, to Norma's point, even when we're breathing on our own, to help move through that, right? And one of the things that we have started to do, actually, I have to credit, I think, Ananya, who's on this call. We used to do a lot of breath work in Centering Justice and just inviting folks to, yes, it is stored in the body, but inviting folks to their breath. So even that in a session, even beginning by helping people to come back to breath, to notice where there's tension. And Wiam and Jobina's work with embracing the gifts of conflict, similarly, their meditation has been really restorative in terms of bringing embodied practice. And I guess as I want to ask, maybe, I hate to say it, kind of our last question, because I do want to give a little bit of time, but like how,
I just wanted to make one thank you to the person who put trauma is stored in the body. And I just want to again make a plug. We all know what trauma does in our bodies, right? The involuntary responses, the way it shapes your whole entire life. The same level of power is possible with wellness. Practicing wellness, release that same level of power in the positive direction.
Anything else you want to say there? Because I just wanted to, that's really what I wanted to ask about, is like, the body keeps the score. Like this podcast for me is all about hearing from folks how we get free, right?
Yeah.
How do embodied practices help us get free? I want to ask you that, Hamida. I want to ask Julie that. I want to ask our audience that. How do our embodied practices help us get free? Because what you feed grows, right?
So Yodit, I'm going to name something you said like 5 minutes ago, sent me on a little bit of a spiral. So we're coming back. Personal
What I
note,
say?
our work, I think in some ways, I mean, we are helping usher in birth and usher in death in similar ways. And that helped me understand some of the different perspectives that we approach work with. Y'all, personally, I'd been looking at becoming a death doula until I realized I have like -0 time or -5 time. And this is work is probably something that needs time and care and effort. But yeah, so I was just sitting in that realization. So sorry, I had a real personal moment there. Could you re-ask the question, please?
Just like, Julie started to talk about this, I told you, it pierced me, this habits thing, right? Because I have some habits that, I would just that have been hard to break, right? Just hard to break. Yeah. And so what I love about this invitation is what the connection of the self to system for me is when I'm habituating around things that no longer serve me, I'm out of alignment with what I believe and value, right? And I could even say that in the organizational context, when we are verbalizing that, we care about people, but then we have policy and practice that are antithetical to that, we have to shift, right? So I'm curious about, if we know that embodied practice help us get free, what are they? What are your practices? What are we practicing? For me, prayer is I start thinking about what is a practice that a daily practice I have, and every day of my life that I can remember, I have prayed every day.
Could people throw practices in the chat?
I'm curious about
what are
some
anything
other embodied practice,
like no judgment or whatever. What practices do people have?
Thank you for that elaboration, Yodi. And I'll offer that. So I've been practicing being more of a friend to my body, frankly, and really getting to know her, affirming that she's hung out with me for 38 years. So maybe I should not talk trash about her. So I think that's been part of it. But also in practicing that love coming from a place of acceptance. So some folks may know that I've started moving much more frequently than I have in the past, and I have a commitment to move every day. And I have a hoped for goal of how far I'm able to walk or run. And I have not met that like loose goal. Yesterday, y'all, I'm in Ipsy. It was rain, snowing. I don't even know what it was last night. And I went out with my little hood up, my raincoat, and I walked a mile, and I was like, yeah, this really feels like not a good time. And I think about what it means to hold that steadfastness to practice in terms of like visiting it and spending time and investing in the self and keeping my word to myself. But also on the flip side, keeping my word to myself and saying, hey, this actually doesn't feel really good. This feels pretty bad and probably not helpful towards your bigger end. So why don't we be kind to ourselves and take that break? So I think about that's one of my practices, but I think about it's also important for me to shift a little bit more to work and to some of the way that we approach diversity and inclusion. And Yodi, what you were talking about, like I feel very tender talking about this. Oh wow. I've lately been thinking about like how wokeness or performativeness like really shows up. And as someone who worked in higher ed for a long time, like has been a consultant, wants to do good. There is this tension of wanting to do good, but I don't want to get canceled. And am I woke enough? I need to be a certain amount of woke to like be included. And I think about like, and at some point I talked about inauthenticity. And being authentic is one of my values. And so I'm diving into I talked about how sometimes I laugh when I'm uncomfortable. So this is funny to me. Diving into some of that murky water of where am I coming at right now? Vic, I don't know if you're telling me to laugh more, be uncomfortable more. I'll choose to laugh more for joy. But really, really examining the self and thinking, so how am I showing up here authentically? And if like I feel I'm sliding into that, I'm saying all the good things that good people say, like taking a moment and pausing and checking. So those are two practices I'm sort of working on. I'm practicing them.
I don't know if you got to say earlier, did you, that you watch your tea or coffee brew every day? I thought that was so
Oh
personal.
yeah. So one of my other values is pleasure. And I think about all the cool things that I do every day that I in the past hadn't paid attention to. So while I did make that comment that in the past I have like made coffee and not known how it magically showed up, I try to pause when I'm in the act of doing things and take in all of the sensations that are happening. So waiting for the water to boil and then like hearing how it sounds, like pouring it through the French
Mm,
press. And when I open up the coffee container, like that first whiff of coffee, and
mhm,
I think it was striking that there was so much I hadn't paid attention to, but hope to move faster and do things quicker with coffee, even with not paying attention to making the coffee.
mm,
So it's also been broadly a practice of slowing down, and
mhm,
taking in what's happening, whether I see it or not, but it's happening.
Well, you said both of you said, the relationship between habit and the way systems are able to just stay. And
mhm,
awareness, one of the ways of describing what you just said was awareness, which was a core practice of poetry. It's awareness. And so if we think about how systems make sure that we don't change them, one is that we don't practice awareness. So we're
mm,
not sensitive to what's happening. But if you're sensitive to what's happening, you will not tolerate one
mm,
more minute of being in the room in a way that it doesn't work, or a system that doesn't work. And so that beautiful practice of, Adrian calls it pleasure, Norma calls it awareness, that practice of awareness, it makes you want something else.
mhm,
That's sort of like I feel like our role as facilitators or organizers, or however we want to think about it, is to instill in people an irrepressible desire for wellness.
mhm,
And if we're
mhm.
operating from that, like, people just want it. But the problem right now is we're not sure we want it. We're not sure we deserve it. We don't know what it looks like. Just want it.
Mm.
Just want it.
Oh, I was just thinking about Tony Bombara and making revolution irresistible. Yeah,
Right.
bless, bless them.
Yeah. Does anyone have anything you want to say we've been talking a lot. Does anyone out there want to come off? We'd love to hear your voices. Yeah.
Hey, Cassie.
Oh, and Nebulosity has a hand. Someone was starting to talk about it.
Yeah, let's go to Nebulosity, and then Cassie will come your way, but we are coming up on time. Y'all, we're gonna do some administrative duties in the chat so we can give folks more time to talk. We always like your feedback on the sessions. So just snatch that. Go ahead, Nebulosity.
Hi, everybody. This is Nabila, by the way. I'm logged in on my phone, and
Hey,
this is
Nabila.
hello. I was actually doing my self-care, and this is a part of my self-care. This was actually my lunch break, and so you have all been a part of like my self-care practice, and I just want to first and foremost just extend so much gratitude to everyone on this call, for everyone who's spoken, for everyone who's participated in the chat, and the energy that you've brought has been very nourishing to me. I was literally actually involved in movement as you opened up, Julie, and you were saying how important movement was. I was actually doing my movement. As soon as I log off, I instantly do yoga stretches. So I was doing my yoga stretches as you were talking about that. So I feel so aligned and so connected. And I just want to just like add several things that I also added in the chat. And I just want to highlight really quickly. For me, I feel that what I'm learning to do, and that's why I love when you said that make wellness irresistible, is that I'm also learning to also make it a ritual and make it a habit, and making self-care something that is something that I'm learning to enjoy. Because I think if we learn to first nourish ourselves, especially as administrators, as mothers, as healers, as givers, and when we're in a society where we're just pouring so much of ourselves into our work, I can just hear the passion from everyone as they're talking about their work and things that they're involved in. And I know that this is an ultra passionate group of people, but we have to also center and schedule these times where we're nourishing ourselves and we're pouring into ourselves, so that we're not running on a deficit, and then we're showing up as our best selves. And then how do we do that? Well, number one, we have to schedule it the same way that we're so good with calendars, with our work. Schedule your self-care, schedule your joy, schedule taking care of yourself. And a lot of times we don't find joy in it. We don't find joy in cooking. We don't find joy in doing our skincare or brushing our hair. We're just doing it so quickly. We're trying to just get through the day. And I'm finding that mindfulness isn't just sitting and meditating, although that is very important. And I do that on a daily basis. But mindfulness is also allowing myself to be in the moment. And the best way to do that is to make it a space of joy, make this a space of honoring our spirit and honoring who we are, and always to take a deep breath and to breathe in this divine support. And that's
Thank
why I
you
was
so much for that.
yeah,
Thank
and
you.
you're welcome. And I would just want to just really quickly, because I'm kind of talking really fast, I had so much to share. I just would like for us, if we all could just take one moment, literally just like 5 seconds, and just take a deep breath, just everyone collectively, because I do believe that healing is a collective act. And that if we could just breathing in through our nostrils and expanding our bellies, and just exhale and sigh, exhale with sound, breathing in and exhale. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Nabila. Here we are in gratitude. Sister, you had a lot of transition happening. And thank you, Julie, for making room on this first day, full day in your new home, and 10th day on new land. I miss your presence here, but I'm excited to reconnect with you in Puerto Rico. And I know that you know that we were talking with David Cobb, who's working with the Wiyot tribe, and he said, my family taught me how to be a good guest. I know you'll be a good guest. Yeah, yeah. And know that home is here holding space for you whenever you get back. Appreciate you. And thank you, all of you, for being with us. Mita, you wanna close us out, my love?
Yeah, so many good thoughts, so many good practices that I'm going to be checking out the chat after we sign off. Thank you everyone so much for joining us. We talked about who we heal with. We talked about how we heal, and how we heal is a choose your own adventure, right? So you're thinking about that now. Next time we're going to talk about where we heal, right? Like what spaces, places, what are really conducive to that. So And I encourage you to check out your values, reflect how your practices or how your actions align with values. And then we're going to come back and talk about place and space. So please be good to yourself and each other, and we'll see you soon.
Bye. Thank you, everybody. This was great.